Let's talk to Ricardo Evangelista from ActivTrades. Ricardo, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
Right, this is your soapbox. You've got 6 minutes. Let's talk about what's going on in the world. Let's kick off with the dollar. What's going on with the dollar?
Interesting times for the dollar. Yesterday, figures came out for inflation. The figures were actually above the expectation. That would lead most people to think that the impact on the currency would be exactly the opposite of what actually happened. So very briefly after the publication of the figures, the dollar gained some terrain against the other major currencies. However, shortly afterwards, and perhaps tempered by other figures that came out, which are to do with retail spending on retail purchases, which were actually below the expectation, the dollar suffered and registered significant losses against the other majors, especially the euro and the pound.
Okay, so dollar yen, we're at sort of 106. We've talked about that 108.5 handle. We talked about the 110 handle. Is this going down to 100?
Well, at the moment, there's no as yet strong signal from the Japanese authorities that they are thinking of intervening. But I wouldn't discard it. Yes, I mean it's an evidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it's breaking key chart points, right?
Absolutely, and also the political environment at the moment is also conducive to the dollar losing further terrain against all the majors, as I mentioned earlier, and specifically the yen. So this is obviously likely to have an impact on the. And we saw that, in fact, with the Japanese stock exchange suffering some consequences and losing some points as a result of the devaluation of the dollar, because obviously Japan, being an exporter, does not like to have a strong currency, especially against the world benchmark like the dollar. So we'll see, but it wouldn't surprise me if at a certain point the Japanese authorities start talking with a stronger voice about this and even intervene.
Right. In terms of the euro dollar, see at sort of 124 there or thereabouts. Italian elections coming up. Is that going to have an impact on the currency?
For the moment, that doesn't seem to be on the cards. We saw a strong impact on the euro yesterday after the publication of some French economic figures. European economies as a whole are growing above expectations. More specifically, the euro group is growing above expectations. The conjecture is completely different from what it was, say, a year and a half, 2 years ago. So I don't know, within the current environment and given the change of scenery and background against which everything else moves, I'm not sure that the Italian elections will have such an impact. Also, we see that some of the Italian populism is actually tempered by, paradoxically, being open to Europe, and so that plays well into the current conjecture of strong political will to strengthen European ties, perhaps as a reaction to what is happening with the UK departing and perhaps trying to put up a show of unity against the UK in the sense of within the current negotiations environment. So I don't think that the Italian election will have much of an impact, and all the signs point to a strengthening euro at the moment.
And in terms of Boris Johnson and cable, is he having an impact on the currency?
Quite subdued. I mean, we saw gains in terrain from the pound in the range of about 0.5% against the other major currencies, specifically dollar and euro, which is actually less than what most people would have expected given the fact that inflation came up above expectations, so CPI was good. Also, quite a hawkish speech from the BOE. 0.5 is nothing, and we didn't see much of a reaction to what Boris Johnson had to say yesterday, at least in the markets. I don't know politically if it had much more impact, but in the markets not as much as one could have anticipated.
And finally, I read this weekend, gold is old. Okay, do you follow gold? Can you believe it's old?
Well, gold is the asset, as you know, Nick, that gains protagonism when things get a bit shakier. So it's gaining some terrain as a consequence of what is happening to the dollar. So it's the correlation movement there. We are at the top. Well, we are on an ascending point of the economic cycle. So it is acceptable to say that gold is cold or old, as they say too. But it could be changing very quickly. For example, the situation in the US deteriorates if further increases in the interest rates over there scare the markets off, and some investors may look at gold as a viable option. So for the moment, perhaps yes. But I wouldn't turn up my back and walk away from gold completely at this stage.
Ricardo, on that note, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nick.